I'm happy to take questions. The one question I will not take is, when do you think this is going to pass? Because if you had asked me that on September the 29th, I would have said they'll pass it at 11:59 p.m. on the 30th, and they didn't. It's a very crazy legislative season. I mean, I've been in Washington for 30 years, and boy, it has just been. Staffers call me, "Hey, do you know anything?" And normally we call staffers and say, "Hey, do you know anything?" So it's a very, very crazy situation right now on the Hill. So I'll cut off the question right now by saying I don't know. We're all just pushing very hard for it to happen quickly.
Well, if no one else will talk, I guess I will.
Okay.
I'm just a little background. This group has been going since 2006. We're in no rush, okay? But you know, we've seen ups and downs as you have. And one thing, the Dubuque Chicago route used to run, and it doesn't run anymore. And Amtrak operated it. It was stopped in 1981, I believe. David, is that correct? So would that be part of this whole process going on? It's a route that used to be there by Amtrak, and now will it be kind of front and center, or is it still, we still have to be in the back of the line? Like,
it is eligible just like a lot of the other routes are or were eligible. The way to get in the front of the line is to try to meet as many of those criteria that we talked about as you can. Rural service, economic benefits to the communities, part of a pre-existing rail plan, all of those things count. None of those things mean, if you can't check all those boxes, it doesn't mean you're off the list. It just means that you're kind of further down on the pecking order. So, you know, it's important to, again, working through the local electeds particularly, Congress really does stand up and listen when all the mayors and MPOs and, you know, county legislatures and things like that stand up and say, hey, this is important to our communities. This is going to help our economies. This is going to help us with jobs. This is going to help us have a better environment. This is going to help us with congestion. This is going to help us with emissions. This is going to help us with climate resilience. To the extent that you can check all those boxes, you can move it to the head of the line. The reason I brought up the Amtrak Connects Us map earlier, you know, when that first came out, a lot of people kind of fixated on, well, this is here and this isn't here, and this city doesn't have service, and how come my route isn't on it? And I would tell everybody, this is not the map, it is a map. It's a pretty good map, but it is just a map. DOT has 180 days to look at the map and look at all those other criteria and see if they have something else in mind, or see if they want to shift the order, or see if they want to put something in the front of the line. This is a great time for people to reach out to DOT and the Federal Railroad Administration and say, look how swell our route is. Look at all the great things it does.
Yeah, well, we kind of know that. I don't know how good we're at it, following through. But in our case, it's been said that going piecemeal doesn't work very well. Rick Harnish, Chicago, has said that. And so we got Chicago to Rockford, Rockford to Dubuque, Dubuque to Waterloo, and to, you know, Mason City to Twin Cities, and piecemeal. So, you know, the interstate compacts seems to be a really heavy burden to try to work between states. When will we have actually a national system and get rid of those silly piecemeal state-supported things. And then the people on this committee don't like me saying this, but then the next step would be to nationalize the railroads, so we don't have to worry about. Okay, that was a little off the top, but anyway, go ahead.
Well, look, there's a lot there, and I don't disagree with you. I think the piecemeal thing, there's a balkanization that's happened, right? And it made it very, very difficult to get consensus on anything. And one of the beauties of passenger rail is precisely the network effect. So you erode the benefit by attacking it in a piecemeal way. And so you're absolutely right. That said, there's not a lot of appetite in this Congress for that. There's also, frankly, not a lot of appetite to give Amtrak full control, which is what that would mean in practice. The House particularly was pretty angry at Amtrak during the pandemic, which is about as much as I want to say in a public forum. But they didn't make a lot of friends on the House side during the pandemic. So why am I bringing all of that up? To get the things that you're talking about requires an amount of buy-in that right now does not exist. And there is a desire, a political desire, to give states more say in how these systems and services come together, which is why we've seen this movement towards the Rail Commission type of a setup. Yes, it is complicated, but it's one reason we have been sort of waving the flag here for the past few years, telling folks, hey, you ought to try to organize a kind of multi-state deal, because that will help you. The good news is that in the Midwest, you do have MIPRC, the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission. That helps. You do have a little bit of a framework there. But you're right. I mean, if you know the magic fairy came, tapped me on the head, said, "Speedy, you can have whatever you want," I would make a map, and it would be across the United States, and it would connect a bunch of destinations, and it would do so in a way that maximized the benefits to all the communities served, and looked at the way people travel and where they need to go, and put all concentrated multiple frequencies in places where people need to go. And that is best done at a national level. There is just no political will to do that. The Amtrak Connects Us map is the closest to that. And as it stands, look at what happened when that rolled out. It was the first time Amtrak rolled out something. They didn't brand it Connects Us, but they did it a year ago, September. And all the states were up in arms. Well, that doesn't match our rail plan. And Amtrak really stepped in it. So they pulled everything back, and they went through and referenced everything to the state rail plans. And that's why the Amtrak Connects Us map comes out the way it does. And that's a very balkanized approach, right? I mean, you're depending on individual state rail plans, and some state rail plans are great and some are pamphlets. So you're not wrong, but it is the system that we have to work with right now. That's another example, though, of where we as advocates can continue to make the case in Congress as to why this is not the best approach, why we can come up with a better, more efficient system, and one that serves more people if we have more of a national approach. But that's going to take a little more political lobbying than we've done to date. I think I answered.
Yeah. I just have one more question, and that is, the study, we're having this study done by Quandel. Did you?
Okay. Yeah.
Have you heard about that study at all?
I did a little bit. Yep.
So that's not complete yet, and it was supposed to be done early next year, but it depends on Rockford and everything else. And all the balkanization, as you mentioned, and also how the legislature in Illinois falls together, falls apart. So is that study useful in this promotional thing to get the
It
thing
could be,
going?
absolutely. Yes, yes. But you know, it's interesting when you said that we have a lot of time. I don't know as we do. Let's pretend that this bill gets signed in the next week or two. 180-day clock starts. So you want that study and you want it done and you want it analyzed. You want to be able to go out with the findings, and you want all of your local electeds to be signed up to the results of that study. So, and you need all of that to happen within that 180-day window. So we don't have a lot of time. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know enough about what they're doing to know what the timeline really is or could be. But boy, if there's some way you could get at least interim results or preliminary findings or something out of that in time to visit with the Federal Railroad Administration with the initial findings, that would help you. That would help you. I would brief it to MIPRC. I would brief it to the FRA as soon as you know it. So, any other questions out there? I feel like I've put everybody to sleep. I don't mean to.
Hi, Jim. This is Mark Quam. I just wanted to say hi. Good that you could join the call here tonight. For those of the rest of you that are on the call, you may not know who I am, but I'm Mark Quam. I live in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. I'm actually a Wisconsin Council representative for Rail Passengers Association, and I'm also involved with All Aboard Minnesota and All Aboard Wisconsin. And I know one thing that we're doing with All Aboard Minnesota, we're trying to work to do more advocacy, promote better passenger rail service for Minnesota and also with Wisconsin. And what we're really hoping down the road here, we can get more local communities engaged and form some type of either rail commissions or like, small local rail compacts. And we think that that might hopefully move the dial a little bit and, kind of move things forward. I guess my question for Jim here would be, I've read and I've heard some speculation that given the labor shortage, with chain supply shortages and labor and whatnot, that Amtrak is having a shortage of workers and employees. And there's been some rumor, and I don't know, maybe you can comment to this, Jim, but there's been rumor that if Amtrak can't get the number of employees they need to run the trains and so forth, that they might have to cut some services back and go back to 3 days a week. Do you think that's real, or do you think that's speculative yet, or what's your thought on that?
I think that's real. I think that's real. And it's unfortunate. This is not a negotiating tactic, right? Because the money's already there. The money's been appropriated. It's really a shame, right? I mean, we now have the political will, we have the appropriations, we have the management in place at Amtrak that actually wants to run the trains. All of those pieces have fallen into place, but they're terribly short-staffed. They have a lot of folks that they furloughed when they went 3X last year, which was a mistake. It was something that we pushed very hard against. They did it anyway. When they furloughed those folks, they presumed they were going to be able to bring them back, and we cautioned. We told them, and we told the Senate Commerce Committee, in the summer of 2020, they're not going to come back. You're going to really gut yourself, and that's what's happened. A lot of folks are not coming back, and this is not a problem that's confined to Amtrak, right? I mean, if you try to get something from a store, get something from Amazon. Where I live, they don't have school bus drivers. They don't have teachers to open the schools. So this is not unique. The Great Resignation is a real thing, but it is hitting Amtrak, and they're about 3,000 positions short right now. They are hiring as fast as they can. But a lot of the folks who've raised their hands to try to get hired at Amtrak have found that they can't pass the most basic initial screening, so they are not qualified. That's been a problem, and it just kind of builds on itself. The last thing they should do is cut service. But if they don't have enough humans to run the train safely, they're not going to have a choice. And this is it. It would be easy to point back to the warning that I personally issued to the FRA, to Amtrak, and to the Senate Commerce Committee in the summer of 2020 that they were setting themselves up for this. But that's not helpful now. That doesn't solve the problem now. What we need to do is really just hope for the best. There's not much we can do to get people hired and in the door. And it's unfortunate. It looks as if the timing of this is, if they can't get people to come back from furlough, requalify, and get back out on the road in a timely fashion, they're looking at somewhere around November 22nd or so, where things are going to get really bad and they're going to have to start cutting back service. Now, think about the timing of that. That's just before Thanksgiving. That is Amtrak's busiest time of the year. It would just, I don't know how to describe what a bomb that's going to be on the transportation system to do that. I hope to heck we're able to avoid that. They're doing everything they can to try to keep people in the building and get people in the building, get people trained, and get people going. But again, pick up any newspaper, and we can't drive school buses, we can't staff warehouses, we can't run restaurants. There's lots of things we can't do. And it's possible that we might not be able to run trains. And that would just be a terrible blow, considering how hard we've all worked for these past few years to get to a point where we have once in a multi-generation funding and political support for passenger rail. And I wish I had better news, but I don't.
Thanks. I had one other question that I wanted to ask Jim here. I'm kind of curious to know the 750-mile cutoff limit, what defines a corridor versus long distance. I'm often have wondered if FRA and other components may come together to reevaluate that, because I sometimes find that 750-mile, it can be really hard to work with some states, especially when you've got, crossing state lines. And I'm just wondering, and even from the RPA perspective, of what the chances are of having, the federal government and FRA relook at that or rethink about that at some point down the road.
So they're re-looking at it now. If you had asked me that question in March, I would have told you that there would be a provision in this bill to rewrite Section 209 and to cut that down to 500 miles. That's how close we were. Everyone was in agreement. Everyone was working towards that direction. Amtrak was there. FRA was there. House committee staff were there. And we really thought we were there. And it just turned out that we didn't get there in this bill. But everyone recognizes the difficulties. Everyone recognizes the problems with Section 209. Section 209 as a program and as a legislative sort of section needs a rewrite anyway. And so everyone is working on that direction. We had really hoped we were going to get this done in this go around. We're not gonna. We may need another piece of legislation, but best we can do. But everyone recognizes the problem. Right now, the legislation is what it is. So FRA and Amtrak and everyone can't just sort of unilaterally declare that, okay, now it's going to be 500. The law won't let them do that. We're going to need a piece of legislation to fix that. But the good news is that just about everybody recognizes the requirement that we do something about that. So there's a lot of energy behind it, and I'm hoping that we can do something in the next legislative session. And I don't know what that something is, but we'll work on it.
To us here, it seems like passenger rail is a no-brainer, for everything. But who's opposed to a passenger rail? I know that, I like to say the airlines are opposed to passenger rail. The freight railroad companies are opposed to passenger rail, the trucking industry, the car industry, the oil industry. Everybody's opposed to passenger rail. The only people who want passenger rail are people.
It's interesting. The airlines are actually kind of neutral on passenger rail. You wouldn't believe that, but it's true. The real opponents of passenger rail in this country tend to be groups like the Koch brothers, and some of those kinds of folks. They tend to be very anti-passenger rail, and they have bankrolled a lot of anti-passenger rail spending. The other chief opponents are the freight railroads, and because they would just as soon get passenger trains off their tracks forever. That's really where the primary opposition comes from. The airlines honestly are kind of neutral. The truckers don't really care. It's primarily oil and gas, Koch brothers, and the freight railroads that have worked so zealously against passenger rail. And that could be a problem in the next Congress if the Congress flips and the Republicans restore control over the House, because that would mean that we would have a Chairman Crawford in the House T&I, which would be, I mean, he is just deeply in his marrow against passenger rail, and he has been one of the leading voices hammering away at this idea that Amtrak needs to make a profit and doesn't make a profit, and therefore it's bad. Never mind that there's nothing in the law that says it's supposed to make a profit. He just keeps repeating it. And the result is that newspapers and magazines and TV programs repeat it as if it's fact, that Amtrak is a private company that's not making money. That's not true. It is not a private company. It is not supposed to make a profit. And that's not what the law says. But if you repeat a lie enough, it becomes true. And that's, he is poised to be the chairman if the House flips. So that could be a problem for us. I see Ed's hand is up.
Well, actually, it's mine. So we're friends with Bill Moyer and spent some time with him on Vashon Island this year. He's really, I think he knows you, Jim, or you know him.
Yeah, you do. Yep.
Yeah. And he taught, and so we live here in the Midwest in Freeport. But he really, and so, and I know very little about this topic tonight. But he was really, seemed like he was saying that Class 1 railroads are the biggest thing that we have to, the freight railroads are the biggest block to this happening. What can be done to fight them? Like, what do you see things that we can do out here, you know, that want this to happen? If they're our biggest opponent, what can we do against them?
It's a tough order. You do have a few things on your side, on our side, I should say. One is that the law on the books right now today recognizes passenger rail's right to exist, and recognizes that the reason why it exists is because Amtrak is effectively a taxpayer-funded bailout of the Class 1 railroads, and has been since 1971. That's a point.
Say that again. I'm sorry, it didn't quite sink in. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Amtrak is a taxpayer-funded bailout of the Class 1 railroads, and has been since 1971. The reason I say that is for the following. The railroads have a common carrier obligation to operate these trains. If Amtrak did not exist, the freight railroads would have to run these services, and they would have to petition the government to discontinue them. They would have to do that on a piecemeal basis, route by route, annulling, 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 getting rid of, getting rid of, getting rid of. That would be a debacle for them, and they know it. The reason Amtrak was created was because the Class 1 railroads could not afford to do passenger rail anymore. And so we nationalized the passenger service, and Amtrak was created to take over the assets of these railroads. So the rolling stock, the routes, the liabilities, the pension obligations. Amtrak is still sending pension checks to people who never wore an Amtrak badge. So the Amtrak absorbed all of this passenger service that these Class 1 railroads were operating, and operates it on their behalf. They do it every year, and it costs very roughly $2 billion a year to do that. So you could argue that that $2 billion a year is a subsidy to the Class 1 railroads. The grand bargain that we struck as a country back in 1971 was, we will do this for you. We will take this off your hands. And the only thing that you have to do is allow us to run on your tracks for a reasonable rate of return. We're not even saying let us on for free. We're saying we will pay a per mile charge as long as it's reasonable. And you have to give preferential dispatch to passenger trains. Passenger trains have to go first because they're shorter and they're faster. And that worked fine until the era of precision scheduled railroading, where we now have, 2.5 mile long freight trains lumbering along at 25 miles an hour, and they're too long to go on a siding and wait for an Amtrak train to go by because we don't have 3 mile long sidings. And so that has created a situation where it is a lot harder to let the Amtrak train go first. So the Class 1s basically decided that we'll just ignore it. And that the law right now requires that not be the case. The Surface Transportation Board is committed right now to enforcing existing law. That was not necessarily true a few years ago, but it is now. So we do have this little window in which the Class 1 railroads could be compelled to do what they're supposed to do. The risk is that the Class 1s, when they get a decision at the Surface Transportation Board they don't like, they will just lawyer up, go to the federal courts, get an injunction, and gum up the works for another 10 years, just like they did on the passenger rail service metrics and standards, which we finally got into place last year after 11 years of litigation. So the good news is we have laws on the books, and we have an STB that's kind of willing to fight this fight. The bad news is Class 1s have a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of lawyers. And so that's what you're up against. I think that one thing that we can do as a country, not as a committee, not as me as an association, but as a country, the more that passengers stand up and say, this is something I want, that will help. We need to create that groundswell so that people understand that this is something that is popular and that people want to have done. And that will help so that you have mayors and county legislators and metropolitan planning organizations, destination marketers, all of those folks saying, look, this is something we need. Now you've got a constituency lined up against the Class 1 railroads, as opposed to just us as advocates lined up against the Class 1 railroads. But we do have the law on our side right now, and which is one reason why I say we need to move quickly while we still have A, the law on our side, B, a positive Surface Transportation Board, and 3, an administration and a Congress that are supportive of passenger rail. We have a very small range of time here in which to operate. So we need to go quickly. We need to get some new services started right away. We need to add frequencies right away. We need to start to make a visible difference in people's lives in the next 6, 8, 10 months, 15 months. We have to do that. And so we've got to be less about studies and more about getting something launched and going.
So are we hoping that if these laws get passed, that part of this money will be spent to make longer, what are they called? The
Sightings?
sidings?
You could do that. There is some money in there that could be directed that way. But part of this is a larger question than that. We are not the only ones who are questioning this idea of precision scheduled railroading. This is a very, very wonky conversation, and I apologize to folks if I'm going too far down in the rabbit hole here. But it's really a big deal. Passengers aren't the only ones that are made late. Okay, all of the shippers, the shipper community, so that means the chemical people, the agriculture people, the people shipping grain, the people shipping coal, the people shipping everything, they get delayed too. And you know, the old joke used to be coal doesn't complain if it's late. But how much economic damage are we seeing in the country right now because things, not people, but things can't get where they're supposed to be in a reasonable amount of time? You've got shipping containers sitting out in the ocean for weeks at a time because they can't get in, because they can't go anywhere. So shippers are already annoyed. I testified on behalf of passengers at a Surface Transportation Board hearing 3 years ago that was devoted to precision scheduled railroading and CSX particularly. And there was 3 days of witnesses, a parade of people just coming in complaining about CSX and precision scheduled railroading. The American Chemical Council, the agriculture people, the package shippers, you name all the commodities folks, one by one came in and said, I don't know where my cars are. I don't know where my stuff is. Stuff is a week late and I don't even know where it is in the system. So these delays affect more than just passengers. Weirdly, that helps us too, because it creates a groundswell around re-examining whether precision scheduled railroading is the right way to go. Now they will argue that, hey, it's my business and I can run my business the way I see fit. But if you start to have downstream effects and potentially safety effects, then you could make a case that there's other things that have to happen. So that's out there. That's way down in the weeds, but we do have that in our toolkit. Honestly, since I took this job in September of 2014, what I have advocated for and what I will still advocate for is that the Class 1s and Amtrak and Rail Passengers Association and maybe FRA, we all need to get in a room and bury whatever hatchet has to be buried and come up with a grand bargain that actually works for everybody. It is possible if everyone could sit in a room and be grown-ups. I think it's possible.
Part of what's missing in the general population is the history. You know, I mean, I obviously should know what you just stated, but I don't. I did not till now. And so when you start looking to see how things are tied together, you have a better view, obviously, and the general public does not. You know, I think the general public just thinks, well, you know, passengers, it was a bygone thing. It was years ago and it can't work. And they'll see, you know, we see a publicity of what they're doing overseas places and you go, wow, how are they possibly doing that? Why can't we do it? But there's no, you know, really good, what's the word?
Public education.
Yeah, the education of the public doesn't happen, so they don't know what to push for. And I think that's where we're sitting right now, where, you know, obviously there's a lot of money that's being, you know, talked about, but we have to push to get it in the right places. Thank you very much, Jim.
Well, I would go back to one other comment I made in nationalized railroads. A lot of other countries have national railroad systems. They're not privately owned. Is this correct? I mean, there are some, obviously, but they're publicly owned. It's for a public service. It's like the post office, which I guess we shouldn't talk about now. But anyway, it's a public service run by the governments, and whereas we have a system here in Canada where they're privately owned. And again, they can do what they want, and the hell with the public.
Yeah, and that's the thing.
So nationalize, we need to nationalize the railroads. Nationalize the railroads. That's the only
And where
solution.
we are right now, and poor Douglas has been very patient as with his electronic hand up. Where we are right now, though, is a partly nationalized system, right? Amtrak is a government entity. As much as people want to think of it as a company, and as much as sometimes when it's to Amtrak's benefit, Amtrak pretends to be a company, the fact is that they are legally, they're a government entity. They're a company organized by the government, set up by the government. The board of directors they are nominated by the president, and they are confirmed through the advice and consent of the Senate. The Supreme Court has ruled twice on the status of Amtrak as a federal entity, and they collect $2 billion a year of taxpayer money to serve communities where it is unprofitable for the private sector to do so. So we're all the way down that road, and so now we just need to put the framework in place to make sure that they don't get stymied in carrying out the public service mission that the taxpayers have given them, and have consistently given them since 1971. So anyway, I'm sorry, Douglas, you had your.
Well, I couldn't get in edgewise, but actually we're starting to run over. So I did want to say thank you for coming on. And Hendrik reminds us that everybody who's on that hasn't found us on Facebook or sign up for our newsletter, please do so. That includes you, the clients. But thank you for coming on. I didn't believe, it's amazing how complex those bills are, and that was mind blowing. And you've given us a lot of good information to bring back to our legislators and maybe inform them and get them active. So thank you for that.
So I saw that we wanted to see what we could do to get more information and stuff. Our website is railpassengers.org. And we have resources. There's a tab, resources. And we have a lot of fact sheets. We've set up a set of fact sheets that we use for our congressional visits. So these are sort of one sheet fact sheets on particular elements of passenger rail policy. They're designed to be handed to a congressional staffer, which means they're perfectly able to be handed to a mayor or a local legislator or something like that. So you can start there. Read our news and commentary. We update that a few times a week. We try to keep everybody up to date there. And the other public education piece is stuff like this. I come out and do talks like this all the time, and I will continue to do it. I will talk to anybody at any time, just to kind of get the word out. So thank you for inviting us. And Douglas, thank you for letting me go a little bit over time. It is complicated. I can't change that, but we're here to help, and we're here to sort of walk people through this. Sean Jeans Gale on my team is my VP for Government Affairs and Policy. He will do talks like this as well. And Mark Mark Quam here is on our elected leadership of the association, and he can help as well. So there are resources out here, and we really are ready to jump in and do what we can. And this is the right time to do it. The clock is genuinely ticking.
Good. Thank you very much. I think we can, anybody else, or I think we'll call it a day. Check your chat area for some links to some of these, to our organizations, and that'll help everybody find us. So if there's nothing else, thanks everybody for attending, and thank you, Jim, especially. So it was very informative. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me. Spread the word.
That's right. All right. We'll call her a day.
Good night.
Good night.